This man is Chief Warrant Officer, 3rd Class Brandon Budge. He'll explain to you why he is a CW3 and not a CW4. And then we've got Lieutenant Ted Macie. And Lieutenant Ted Macie is a naval officer who was with the Seabees and is going to talk to us a lot about health, mental health of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and the armed forces. And I think you'll find this discussion both concerning but also gratifying, because it's not often that we get a chance to hear unrehearsed remarks from people who are actually serving or people who recently left, as the case with Ted, who left in September last year. Everyone is usually put through a meat grinder and screened and thoroughly assimilated so that they say the things that the armed services want you to hear. That doesn't mean that these are whistleblowers. They're simply going to talk about reality, what they've experienced, and what they hope people in the future will not experience. And maybe they'll talk about some things that they experienced that they would like everybody to know about, that were good. So with that, we're going to launch, and the opening discussion is about health and welfare, mental health, suicides. What are the things that lead to suicides? Why is this such an epidemic? And ultimately, at the end of this long discussion this afternoon, we'll try to talk about some solutions. So I'm going to start with Brandon. Why don't you take this away? You were the first to contact me, and you were the man that corralled everybody else into this.
Yeah, I was working with Ryan Swayze in an unofficial capacity, and Ryan had sent me a graphic. He was talking to Adam Dortona and I, who will come later, and we talked about the issue of suicide and the amount of suicide, and then the different segments of suicide. But the most concerning of them all was the increase in suicides over just the last 4 years that were directly related to administrative or legal action. And they accounted for nearly 30%. And I actually brought a graphic with me. Seth Ritter created this graphic, and he put it on X. But this graphic, it depicts very clearly the number of individuals as far as a percentage goes that committed suicide that were directly involved in some sort of legal or administrative action. But what was interesting to me is it doesn't make sense that suddenly we've got more lawless individuals that are joining the military, but rather is there an issue with leadership that has created kind of this, we keep hearing the term lawfare over and over again, but has created the scenario and the environment that has led to this increase in suicides that are related directly to this administrative action.
Now, in these slides, do you want to refer to anything specifically on any of the slides?
Yeah, there's a percentage. According to the slides, so total suicide deaths from 2008 to 2023 were 7,260 suicides.
And this is a spike.
This is a spike. Now this graphic particularly, it depicts active duty suicide deaths, 5,001, but those are 32.85% of all suicide deaths every year are related to administrative or legal action.
So we're not talking about PTSD.
No, this is, and if you think about the planes of existence that people are on, so we normally walk around, everything's kind of fine. There's minimal stress. We're just going about our daily lives. And then you have your tolerable stress level where you're functioning, maybe that's a deployed environment or something. Mm-hmm. And then after that, you descend further and further down until you get to the point of hopelessness. And that's where it seems people are being driven in our active duty ranks. They go from that daily existence, that tolerable stress, and they descend kind of down the spiral to the point where they reach hopelessness. And then, unfortunately, for 32.85% of those individuals, it's related to this legal action, this administrative action that's taken place. And those individuals end up taking their lives. They leave behind family, they leave behind friends, they leave behind a lot of questions that aren't answered. And if you think about just say general scenario, this isn't anything that relates to any specific event, but you take an E5 and he's already struggling to feed his family because the pay's not great, right? I've known lots of E5s, my crew chiefs that are on WIC.
And E5 is a sergeant.
Yes. So we have a sergeant in the Army. He's struggling to feed his family already, and it causes stress and tension that's manageable within his family, with he and his wife and their new baby. But then suddenly he makes a seemingly small mistake. Like if we use the last 4 years, he questions the C-19 mandate and the vaccines. And suddenly leadership has now, there's a spotlight placed directly on that individual. That spotlight leads to isolation because, just like.
In other words, he's viewed as somebody who's trouble.
He's trouble.
So everyone stays away from him. He doesn't have any support from the people he normally works with.
Exactly. So he's left alone. And then when he goes home, because of the increased stress that comes from this, that increases tension at home. So now he has nowhere to go to relieve that tension.
Well, now you've been effectively a victim of this sort of thing yourself. So why don't you explain that?
Okay, so in my own case, I don't want to take up too much time on my own thing because there's tens of thousands of people that have gone through things like this, and the suicide thing is the worst of what's happened. But I was selected for Chief Warrant Officer 4. I had a sequence number. I was supposed to.
Now explain your aviation background.
Oh, my aviation.
And what you flew. Yeah. And
I'm a Black Hawk pilot. I'm an air assault pilot, and I'm a maintenance test pilot in the United States Army.
And that's need to explain that a maintenance test pilot is not what every aviator achieves. That's a remarkable achievement.
And what's interesting is, as warrant officers, we specialize in something. So some warrant officers will be instructor pilots, some will be maintenance test pilots, and then we have 2 other tracks that are safety and TAC ops. And those 2 other tracks, they're not flying tracks per se, but that's neither here nor there. What the maintenance test pilot side of things is, my job is to take an aircraft that's been there's either a maintenance iteration that has gone on, whether scheduled or unscheduled, or there's been some sort of failure in a component. That component's replaced, adjustments are made, and then I take it out. And sometimes I'll make the adjustments, but I have to then sign off that aircraft to make sure that it's safe for the other pilots to fly. I'm also a pilot in command. A pilot in command I was selected for it by a board. This is quite a while ago in my career. And then I'm an air mission commander. So I act as an air mission commander actually in Afghanistan, 2015-16. So I was in charge of, if we sent 2 or 3 aircraft out, I was the guy that was in charge of that entire flight. So
you've been in the Army how long?
21 years I've been in the military. I started in the Navy, 49 months in the Navy, according to the DD-214 that they gave me, and then the rest of the time spent in the Army.
Well, we'll let Ted ultimately explain why you left the Navy and joined the Army. Yeah, I'm just kidding. But you in particular have reached a point in your career that is the result of extensive experience, not just here in the United States, but overseas. How many deployments have you had?
I've been to Afghanistan twice, and then I spent a year in the Sinai for the multinational force and observers. Right. It was during do you guys remember the Arab Spring, they called it?
And now you need to explain why you're suddenly leaving, because normally you would think the Army would work tirelessly to keep you.
Yeah, I
because you can't easily be replaced.
Yeah, I don't really have a choice. In my case, because CW4 was removed from me over the C-19 mandate.
And explain not everybody understands the C-19
So
mandate.
The COVID mandate was, we were all mandated to take a vaccine.
Right.
And if you question that vaccine, going back to that scenario I was creating with that E5, it put a spotlight on you as a member of the armed services. And so you were singled out. And unfortunately, most commands, I can only speak for what I experienced, but knowing that there are thousands and thousands of others that went through similar circumstances, it was happening all over. And these commands would use this mandate to create a scenario where you were essentially in a fight to save your career. Mm-hmm. And for those of us that were real close to retirement, I think guys like Mark Bashaw, who was very close to retirement, was removed. We don't have much recourse.
Right.
We can't. It's not like
you're treated as though you have committed a violation of regulations you're a quasi-criminal.
Yes.
Because you declined to take the vaccine. What were
Yes.
your grounds for declining the
So
vaccine?
for my wife and I, we didn't trust the vaccine itself, and we didn't trust the material, the information that was being given. And actually, there was a lack of information, and so that also bred that distrust.
Well, I remember back in 1991, they came out with this alleged anthrax vaccine, and I refused to take it. And soldiers asked me what I thought. I said, I'm not taking it. I said, they want you to sign a release absolving the Army of any responsibility of anything bad that happens to you. I said, has the Army ever asked you to sign such a thing in your life? No, sir. I said, well, I'm not signing it. Now, in some units, they actually punished people with Article 15s for failing to take the vaccine. It's absurd. And we don't know the precise effects of the anthrax vaccine. I've heard various stories, and the Army's effectively buried that. I know, I guess the armed forces, but particularly the Army. I don't know what the Marines did with it. So I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the thing is, and this is very important for everybody to understand, you're talking about a soldier, a warrant officer with years of experience in education and training. He's in excellent physical condition. He's mentally acute. He has many years of potential service left in him. He wants to serve. He loves the Army. He loves what he does. I'm sure he'll talk about the things that he doesn't like, but this makes no sense. We're rushing him out because he simply said, I don't trust the vaccine. And now we have millions of people in the United States and all around the world, all of whom are questioning the vaccine. And the data is piling up. This is one of the reasons many, many people really supported RFK Jr. for the presidency, because he spoke out early and often about the issue.
Yeah.
I never took the anthrax vaccine. I have never taken the COVID vaccine. And I know a lot of people who have, and they are not well. So there's something rotten with this whole process. But most important, why would you railroad someone with this kind of background and experience out of the force? And then you look at the graphics that he's talking about. You can refer to those. We'll make them available after this is over. Why this? Well, if your life is being destroyed over an issue like this because you won't comply, you say, I question this and I don't want to do it, then it's easy to understand why people then are losing everything and they lose hope. And they decide that there's no alternative for them. And the best thing they can do is to opt out of life, which is incomprehensible to me as a soldier. I mean, you know that your life is on the line when you go into action. You accept that. Why would we create conditions conducive to suicide in peacetime, let alone wartime? It's bad enough. So it's hard for me to understand.
I think it's hard for any of us to understand. I think Ted can speak to that a lot.
Yeah, I was going to turn to Ted, even though he was in the Navy, and he can talk about his own observations. And you were the Seabees, right?
I was, yes.
Yeah,
I joined in March 2001.
Okay. Well, tell us what your experience was and what you think.
Okay, so I joined in 01 as a CB. I was a builder, and I was stationed in California for 5 years, and I deployed 3 times there.
You just started as what?
As an enlisted guy, E2, and made my way through the ranks. I got off the active duty as an E5, went to the reserves, main first class, which is an E6. And prior to leaving active duty, I got my undergraduate degree in political science through University of Maryland. Then from there, I decided that I'd like to become an officer because I was going to make it a career. With the push of my beautiful wife that I started our family with in Spain. We had our first born in Spain. And from there, I went to Boston, joined the reserves, and got my graduate degree in health administration. And that's where I essentially became a commissioned officer in 2013.
So that's when you became familiar with the mental health issues.
No, not necessarily in 2013. Most of it was, I was aware of it just from hearing about it. It was from it being an issue for the entire time I've been in the military. But really dug in starting through the COVID mandates. And your last conversation you had with him, about the anthrax vaccine, there's still many people who went through that who are looking to be made whole, and the majority of them have not been. And if you remember the Doe v. Rumsfeld case, the government lost that case because you can't force anybody to take an emergency use authorized drug until it's fully FDA approved. And then the only way you can waive someone's rights, so to speak, is through 10 U.S. Code 1107A, which is a presidential waiver of your rights. Not your rights, but I mean, you can still avoid it. However, it's a mechanism to be able to say, all right, you guys need to take this because you're applying to A and B. And that's the idea behind it.
In other words, the president has the authority to essentially demand that you take the vaccine. What do you?
Yes and no. It's a mechanism to I think be legally less responsible for any outcome.
Oh, I see. So in other words, another attempt to absolve the federal government and the armed forces of any liability.
Right. And the EUA is also that. But there's no informed consent for the COVID drug. So you're essentially waiving your rights there too. And we'll get into how illegal that whole thing was.
Well,
but
tell us what's happened to you, what you experienced personally, and you just left in September. So how many years did you serve?
20 active, 3 reserve, total of 23.
So tell us what led you to finally retire and walk away.
I was essentially forced out by not making rank. So during my promotable years, so there's a zone. You get your below zone, which is you typically won't make rank, and then you get into end zone, where they look at you with the board, and then above zone as well, where you're kind of timing out of that, and it's another board. You're still able to make rank. However, and this is all provable. I have the receipts. I the belts.
So this means that you did not become a lieutenant commander.
Correct.
Which is a major for those of you who are in the Army or Marines out there. People help us understand that. And this had to do with what you had already done as an enlisted man, as well as when you were on active duty. You sort of ran out of time.
Right.
And
higher tenure.
Yeah, this is another issue that we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we have a lot of people who are very good soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines who are not necessarily going to become field grade officers, that is major, lieutenant, colonel, but can still serve and contribute and be effective. But we have this up and out mentality that sort of erases people at a certain point. Well, thanks, we don't really need you, without any serious examination of what it is that you're doing and what you've done and why you might be retained to do this again. But so anyway, I just want to make that observation. Now, I want to get back to this issue of mental health, though.
All right. Well, I do have to say, to get back to that, I was a whistleblower, and I was doing everything through the formal procedures, which does have to do with this.
Now, when you say you were a whistleblower, I didn't know that. What constituted being a whistleblower in your case?
So there's a database which is relatively familiar with and the COVID-19 mandate realm, but it's called DMED, the Defense Medical Epidemiology Database, and it's a set of ICD codes, so billing codes essentially, and it's all active duty. So if you're seen out in town with a civilian provider or you're out at an MTF, this code gets put into a database, and you can look at it by year. You can narrow it down to female, male, black, white, anything. That's a pay grade, and it's a continuation of what Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long did and Doug P. Chambers and Dr. Shaw.
I like that because most of the audience will not know what you're talking.
Right. So what they did is they took these numbers of the average of 2016 to 2020 of all these ICD codes into certain things, say like mental health diagnosis, right? Or heart conditions like myocarditis, that was the famous one. And they take this ICD
because there are people that took the COVID shot.
They did not. They were the whistleblowers.
Okay.
Actually,
But the people they're talking about, the database did.
yes.
Okay, I just want to make that distinction. So what you're talking about, you got into the database and looked at the people that had taken the shots, and whatever problems emerged as a result.
It's the collective military, but the majority of the military at least took one. But you look at the trend for year by year, and starting in 2021 is when this increase started happening. Didn't happen in 2020 when the virus was out, right? So I sent all this to Senator Johnson and the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, and he wrote letters essentially to the Secretary of Defense. And to our surprise, they actually wrote back and acknowledged this data to be true the second go around. And that in those numbers was the 151% of myocarditis increase in 2021.
And send it again, the
Myocarditis, right? That's just one example.
and that's the heart condition.
Yes,
So we hear about so frequently.
it's
And
so they actually acknowledge that. But in the same letter, because I sent them cancers, the heart issues, they had no appetite to look into any of this. Because at the last
when
paragraph,
you say they have no appetite, who you're referring to.
Defense Health Agency, Secretary of Defense, the administration.
So Senator Ron Johnson was unable to precipitate any real action.
No, because it's a third rail subject. Because look at the DC class, how many of them are backed by pharma and backed by big hospitals, and
Who else besides Ron Johnson supported you from the Senate or the House?
we had not many. We had House Armed Services Committee, Jim Banks, Matt Gaetz, and they did actually hold a congressional hearing on it, where they brought in DHA, two of them from DHA, and questioned them on it. And that's as far as it got.
But this is very important for the listeners out there, for viewers. The President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief, and his executive authority over the executive branch is enormous. In other words, he can literally say, I see Colonel so-and-so, I want him to be general, and it happens. That's the kind of authority he gets. By the way, Secretary of Defense has similar authority on promotions. The point I'm trying to get to is that regardless of what you tell Congress, Congress's ability to influence what happens inside the armed forces is really quite limited. And so it's not necessarily Senator Johnson's fault that nothing substantive happened. He did his job, so to say. He fulfilled his obligation, brought the matter to the attention of the real authorities. But then you have to have action. That action has to come from Lloyd Austin, who at the time was Secretary of Defense. It has to come from, in your case, the Chief of Naval Operations, I guess, and others who have an interest in the health and welfare of their soldiers, sailors. So you discovered that you say there was no appetite.
Right.
That means
Simple.
preferred not to discuss it.
Right. And this whole DMED system I'm talking about it's there for this reason. Like literally, it's there for this reason. It is to look at trends, and it's taken someone that it's not under my purview to look at something like this, but I knew it was going on, and I was like, okay, I have access to this. I can look at it, continue to look at it, and start seeing these trends again. And
so you're doing what any statistician would do.
right. And it's simple. It's you can plug it and look at it. It doesn't take much thought to it, and that's another thing too. The people at DHA knew this was going on, and they're completely just ignoring it as much as they possibly can because they know it's the comedy.
You say people at DHA. What's DHA? Remember, you're talking
Defense Health Agency. So the healthcare part of the military.
who's at the top of that, or who was at the time?
Toledo Crossland is the new one. Toledo, if I'm saying it right.
What kind of oversight has she got, or authority in this sense? Can she cause something that?
Absolutely.
Well, what could she do?
At the time, they could have halted the shot because they say, what happened in 2021 is common sense, right? Nothing started increasing in 2020 when the COVID virus started. 2021 is when it all started because we started getting this shot in mid-December of 2020. And then you go, okay, what happened in 2021? The shot was introduced. So let's take a step back. You were a relatively healthy force, use that loosely. But so we should be okay if we're not vaccinating more people, inoculating more people. They could halt the shot and say, let's take a deep dive, see what's causing the myocarditis, right? So, and another important fact is the Defense Health Agency had word that there's myocarditis in young men, military men. They expected 1 to 8 cases. They already expected myocarditis from the shot, right? And then in July, I have copies of it. The PowerPoint presentation of 38 cases of myocarditis in July. And guess what happened next month in August? The shot mandate. So the same people who were assisting in this said, all right, well, 38 cases of myocarditis is okay. And that's observed too. So we have people like pilots that may have some problems.
That's over what period of time that they observed, where you said roughly 60 days, 90 days, 30 days?
Well, since it started in December, I mean, and they might have had some people in the trial phases.
Yes.
So, I mean, it wasn't that long of a period.
Yeah, what give me an estimate of the time?
3 months, because they know they came out in May, and then it was on the slides in July.
So this is an untested vaccine effect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so 90 days passes, and they say 38 cases of this is acceptable. And then what happens?
So by their actions, they manage it.
Right. So
It's crazy.
what happens next? These cases spiked.
Yes, they did.
Pathetic. And so now we have, how many people would you estimate off the top of your head that suffer with this malady who are on active duty, or do these people have to be removed from active duty?
So I don't have the exact number. I haven't had DMED access in a while because that's another whole situation. I was relieved of all my duties and computer access because of investing.
Good, you released that information. And to whom did you release it?
Senator Johnson, chain of command, Senator Johnson, and directly the CNO. She came to base, had a big open forum with the entire base, and I read out loud what was happening. As she said, send it to my aide, Captain Pottenberg. Captain Pottenberg sent it to the Navy IG, and then it sat, and there's still nothing there. So,
Well, she's gone. She was just fired.
you know what's crazy too? So I actually read out breast cancer on one of those things, and she ended up having breast cancer after that.
Well, the sad part is that there was, as you say, no appetite, which simply means that didn't want to take responsibility for any of it. So there's no accountability.
That plays back into the suicide part of things, because there's no accountability, and so they can. And I'm speaking from my own personal experience. I can't speak for everybody else, but I can observe things.
Mhm.
I'm intelligent enough to do something like that, and those things led to kind of this administrative state we saw that started to consume the military and the commands. I mean, people were treated like lepers.
Anybody who didn't comply.
Because they questioned something like this, and it was because the data was not readily available. Not everybody has access to DMED. As a pilot, I'm not going to go into DMED and go through code and be able to pull up and see the trends that he was able to see. And that stuff wasn't shared with my wife and I. We have 7 kids total.
Good for you.
Yeah. It wasn't shared with us.
More
We need
children.
more kids, right? So that wasn't shared with us, and so we didn't have the ability to look at any data and make an informed decision. And I, just like as an air assault pilot, we'll put together an air assault mission to serve the ground force commander. You, sir, when you were there.
Well,
right?
I commanded aviation in the cavalry. That I commanded,
So
I know
we
exactly
would put
what you mean.
together an air assault mission to support the ground force commander.
Mhm.
If I went to the ground force commander with my air assault plan and said, "Hey, sir, there's a lot of holes in our plan, but we'll figure it out as we go," I can't imagine that any ground force commander would be like, "Let's go for it." But in my case,
Well, even worse than that, we've done, just before we're leaving to launch the assault, we discovered the enemy is in the area.
yeah,
And they say, well, we can't change anything now.
yeah,
And that
Sorry.
I've seen that happen, by the
yeah.
way.
So
People actually make those bad decisions at the NTC.
so
Incomprehensible.
what's funny is is we expected other people to just accept the fact that there were holes in the information, and to make an uninformed decision that could have an everlasting effect on their life.
Yeah.
And then when they weren't, they were ostracized to the point that they spiraled down to suicide. And whether that was...
Have you seen that in the Navy as well?
Yes, sir. So I'm pulling up something while you guys talk about
So,
it.
and of course, all of this is anecdotal for myself, and I don't represent anybody in any official capacity, but I do represent my family, and I am able to make decisions for my family,
Of
my
course.
wife and I. And when I was flying air assault missions, or when I was flying around Afghanistan as an air mission commander, I made decisions that could have affected all of the crews. And so I had to make sure that I made informed decisions. Never once did I ever think about withholding information purposely from the other crews. We had briefs and we shared all of the available information.
Yeah, this is another old problem though in the history of the Army. The U.S. Army doesn't always provide all of the intelligence and real-time information that people need on the ground. I'm serious.
Yeah.
And this is another manifestation of, well, they don't really need to know that.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous way to do business. Let them have it. As soon as you know about it, if you can validate it, let them have it.
In my case, the funny thing is when they conducted this investigation, they told myself in written form, email and text message, that I was not being investigated. They told a lawyer that I was not being investigated. And then they give me a general officer's memorandum of reprimand. And I won't share names and stuff here. I don't know if it's appropriate to do so. But the worst part is one of the individuals involved in this whole ordeal told myself in the presence of an officer that was his XO and had been his XO that there were gaping holes in the investigation that would make great AAR comments for future investigations. So my career, my livelihood, all of that hung on the precipice of, it was terrible, but we'll use the AAR comments, the after action review, we'll use that to make sure that the next ones are better.
So the bottom line is you're railroaded one way or the other because you didn't take the vaccine, period.
Yeah, well,
you're castigated, and they begin to try to poke holes in your career and your argument, your reputation.
Well, no, the gaping holes were their own in their investigation.
On their side.
Yeah,
okay.
And they were admitted gaping holes by one of the individuals involved, but they weren't willing to fix it, right?
Well, that's ridiculous. But of course, if a general officer signed the memorandum, you have to ask, why did the general so readily sign off on this?
Yeah, with gaping holes, right?
He should be more interested in somebody that's serving under his command that is experienced, long service soldier. Now you want me to essentially end this man's career and expel him? You would think a general officer would say, well, wait a minute. This is not PFC so-and-so who's only been with us for 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
This is somebody who's been with us for 20 plus years, and you want to get rid of him?
Yeah.
You got to give me a good reason because I don't see it.
Yeah, at the time I had 18 years in. But what's worse is I ended up taking the vaccine. I did it on my own terms. I made an appointment out in town because they were going to send me to Korea, and there was a travel restriction. There was a 2-week quarantine period that was required, and my wife was pregnant, and my command refused to extend my time in the States 90 days so I could be here with her, and she was high risk, and we had letters from the doctors.
You couldn't give her the vaccine.
Didn't have anything to do with giving her the vaccine. I was told that even if something happened to her, that I would not be able to come home from Korea.
That's ridiculous.
Because there was a 2-week quarantine period. And so I fought that the whole time I resisted the vaccine, and then they used my wife and our situation to force me into taking it, because if something happened to her, how was I going to live with myself if I was
Now, the vaccine that you took, you told me it was the Johnson & Johnson.
No, it wasn't. It was, I think it was, if I remember correctly, I took it at Walgreens. So I think that they were doing the Pfizer and the Moderna, and I think I took the Moderna one.
Just one?
I took the first round with them. I was on leave because I was getting ready to go to Korea, so it was pre PCS leave, and I took it on my own. I made an appointment, and then I got embroiled in this whole investigation thing in the Gomar.
So you never took a second one?
No, I did take a second
Oh, you
one. I
did?
took a second one a couple of months later on post.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, and it was all the threats against the family, the threats I was already facing with my career, that kind of stuff.
So being compelled to take the vaccine and then obviously complying with it did nothing to help you with...
Nothing at all. But not only that, I mean, now I'm close to $40,000 into legal fees.
Yeah, of course. This is lawfare. They beat you to death because how can you fund yourself against the federal government?
Exactly.
The federal government has inexhaustible funds.
So you think, I'll go back to my scenario, you think that back to that, that E5, or imaginary E5, he comes home and now he's an E4, because he didn't want to comply with something.
Yeah.
And now they're already stressed out because they're struggling to pay bills, they're struggling to eat, they've got a new baby. And what, in his mind, I've lost rank, I've lost pay, I'm going to lose my military career. Maybe he's been in 2 or 3 years. Where else is there for him to go?
Yeah, well, the argument is clear, that we don't care what you've done or you disobeyed. This is our mandate and you're out, and no one's willing to question it, even though the data suggests this is a very dangerous vaccine.
Yeah, and
may not even be a vaccine, whatever it is.
And very tragically, in so many circumstances, those individuals chose suicide, and whatever their reasoning was. And that's the hard part.
Well, we're glad that you did not.
Yes.
Don't even think about it.
No.
Now, have you asked for any help from anybody?
I have. General Flynn's been real good, and he's been very helpful. And he actually made some phone calls for me.
I know, but I'm talking about money wise.
Money wise, we started a Give Send Go.
Well, the CEO of Give Send Go is a strong supporter of ours.
Okay.
We really, really love Give Send Go. They're great people.
But the Give Send Go part was actually for, I had filed some IG complaints, and this is where guys like Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Swayze, the one,
yes, who wasn't able to join us.
Yeah, Walk the Talk Foundation, for IG reform. I filed some IG complaints, and those IG complaints, I filed a FOIA to get the results of the investigations that were done, and that FOIA was denied. And so, without that information, I can't use it to defend myself and my family.
Well, again, this is why we're here, and this is why you're speaking, because you have the Secretary of Defense and the President who have the authority to say no, to override all of this. Now, let me go to you, Ted, and pick up on where we are now with regard to the vaccine and these problems of intimidation.
As y'all talk, I'm going through scenarios and different instances that I know of, and it's 3 years worth. And I just wanted to jump in every second, but there's so many different cases that it's overwhelming. Everybody was essentially coerced into it even before the mandate. And when he was talking about, the Navy would say, "You're not going to get off the ship even if we pull into port if you don't get it," right? Everything was coercion. Everything was coercion. And that's when something's emergency use. It should be like, do you want this? Yes or no? No. Okay, good enough. And that's it. And there's this misconception that you leave your rights at the door when you join the military, and that's absolutely false. We still have our constitutional rights, and that's why we have the RFRA in the 90s or 80s, 90s. All these additional protections, and these politicians want to add to it. They're just redundant laws. It's like you enforce the ones on the books already, and we don't have a problem. And you just want to grandstand on these.
Well, that's been
ideas.
true for a lot of things.
Right.
I mean, just look at the immigration laws, and they flaunted them and dumped them under several administrations. President Trump was the exception. Now he's back. Mm-hmm. If you simply enforce the law, you could have dealt with most of this without any difficulty at all. But then you have judges that don't even enforce the law. I mean, it's a sort of internal rot that has gotten to us.
Yeah. So I was pulling up on my phone this email that's from September of 2021 that accidentally got to me, and it has a 2-star general in it, and they're talking about they're answering questions. Like, I think it's like a surgeon general, a lawyer, whoever that's responding. And they're talking about the hesitancy following the death of one of our unit's pilots due to a heart attack approximately 10 days after receiving the second dose of the Moderna vaccine. And the airmen are all concerned about it because everybody knew about it, right? They're like, well, what happens if I take it? Is there any recourse if something happens to me, or what happens for my family? And then the other one is there are holes in it. There's daylight, they said, and the emergency use part of it. Like, when are we getting the actual approved product? Which is a whole other show, like of trickery and bait and switch. But 77% of the 5,300 adverse events reported are mild. And the guy goes, well, what about the 23% of that weren't mild? And they do everything to obfuscate it and push this thing. And it's criminal.
We really are talking about the armed forces. Those are big numbers.
Yeah.
It's hard because there are a lot of people.
And to stick to the suicide thing, and DMED, that database I was talking about, they don't show death numbers, but they do show suicide attempts, and that increased 33% over the 5-year average, and which has a lot. You don't just jump to suicide. There's mental health issues before that, right? And
So in other words, there's a buildup of issues and problems that
Right.
then become unsolvable.
And I'm looking at, so I made some little graphs or whatever for these articles over the years that I've been contributing to. So like this one has got the ICD code's F33. There's hundreds of thousands. This one's major depressive disorder, recurrent, all occurring. So it means every time you go to the doctor for this, it doesn't mean it's your initial time. So that the numbers could look a little larger, but they're huge. And over the 5-year average, like I was saying, 2016 to 2020, you get the average of that, and then compare it to 2021. So there's a 34% increase in major depressive disorder, and there's a 46% increase in 2022 for major depressive disorder. That's when it comes to.
So what you're saying is specifically under the Biden administration.
Yes, sir. So the alarm is blaring. You have tons of us, like the people who are outspoken on social media, because we literally had to turn it to social media because we're not getting anywhere with Congress. We're not getting anywhere with our local reps. You have some people that will they'll talk to you and you'll be heard a little bit, but it doesn't go anywhere because, again, even the politicians are up against, if they do feel like they could do something, they're up against the entire.
Well, one of the things we have to keep in mind, and we'll discuss this in the next segment, which will be coming up shortly, and that is that the biggest advocates for the soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine should be the flag officer in the chain of command.
Yeah.
In other words, the flag officer, as any commander, whether they're a flag officer or not, has the right to demand that you perform your duty.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. But they don't. There's an unfortunate disconnect. They don't seem to understand that if you're asking somebody to perform his or her duty and put his or her life on the line, you have an obligation to protect them.
Right.
And we do everything, or we should, and we try, at least I did, everything in my power to ensure that everybody comes back alive. We all know that never happens. I tried very hard in 1991. We still had 1 man killed and 6 wounded. Mm-hmm. And subsequently, by the way, we had a couple of people die of this mysterious Desert Storm ailment. And at the time, nobody could figure this out, but one of the culprits they thought might be this anthrax vaccine. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is that somewhere in this process should be a general officer who says, no, wait a minute, I'm happy to support you, Colonel or Lieutenant Colonel or Commander or Captain, but I need to know more. Why is this soldier who's otherwise performed brilliantly suddenly public enemy number 1? And I think we've got a problem, and I'm sure Secretary Hegseth realizes this, and I know President Trump does, with a lot of yes men at the top who are scrambling to get promoted. Mm-hmm. What's every 1-star general want? Another star. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so if they have to sacrifice somebody in order to demonstrate their fealty or loyalty to the administration, whatever it is, that trumps everything else. And it shouldn't be that way. But we know that it is, and it's wrong. I sincerely hope that Secretary of Defense Hegseth and President Trump, hopefully, will see some of this, because I think it will help them craft the policies that they want us to pursue in the future. Finally, the man leading our veterans program is Bill Bala, a Navy veteran. Please contact him if you have any questions. And veterans in general, please call us, talk to us, and hopefully join us. We want you. We need you in our ranks. Our country, our choice is about uniting this country and moving it forward. And we need your help. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.